Hi everybody! We are going to be doing our class remotely, and the way that this will happen is by video. You will be watching a synopsis of what you need to know each week for the chapter that we are covering, and then you will do the assignments just as usual on Canvas, so that won't change. Exams will though, and I will be posting something about that shortly on Canvas as well under announcements. So we're going to get started with this week's chapter, which is development. So again, I apologize for the inconvenience that this is causing. I'm sure you see everything in the news like I do, that we are not able to meet in person. So this is the way things will be for the foreseeable future until we learn otherwise. But keep checking Canvas for more information. So let's start with today's chapter, which is development. So you will be getting skeleton notes and handouts that will be posted on Canvas, and it will be in PDF format, but for now I'm going to go over it so that you will have the information you need. These videos will not include my usual stories and dumb jokes, so it'll be much quicker than usual. Ready? Let's get started. First of all, development is considered to be the point of conception all the way until death, whenever that occurs. So we're going to go over many different stages of development in this chapter. The first thing is nature versus nurture. I'm sure you've heard about this in other classes. Nature is the biological inheritance you get from your biological parents, and nurture is the things you experience in your life. So as humans, we are made up of our genetics, the biology, and that's the nature, versus things that we experience throughout our lives, the nurture. Piaget. There are two theories that we're going to start with, and Piaget is the first one. He studied cognitive development. This will be important not only on the exam, but on the Canvas assignment as well for this week. So Piaget said, first stage is sensory motor. Sensory motor occurs approximately the first 2 years of life. And that is when students become, not students, what am I saying? When children, I'm always thinking of you guys as students, children become aware of their senses and their motor movement. So the 5 senses, what they smell, what they hear, what they taste, what they feel, and their motor movement, crawling, grabbing things, putting things in their mouth, all of that. This is the sensory motor stage. Now, one thing that children develop during this stage is called object permanence. They realize that things still exist when they can't see them. If you see a baby who's 2-3 months of age, they will not look for something that is missing. If they don't see it, it's out of sight, out of mind. But that is not true for an older baby, 7 or 8 months of age. They will notice when something is not right in front of them, and they will go look for it if they want it. The next stage is pre-operational, 2 to 7 years old. What you see happen here is they're starting to understand cognitively, with their thinking, how the world works, but yet in a different sort of way. They're starting to relate things, understand things. One thing that happens during this stage at the beginning, since it's 2 to 7, that's several years. At the beginning, symbolic function. Children learn how to pretend. If they're understanding how the world really works, it's not a surprise when they think of their doll as a baby, when they point to the moon and say ball, when, they cut their sandwich or bite it into the shape of an animal or a monster or something. They're starting to see how the world really works by pretending. Another thing that happens toward the end of this stage is called conservation. 5, 6, and 7-year-old children start to be able to undo things in their minds. So what does that mean exactly? Well, if you were to take a 12-ounce can, I could demonstrate it here if I had them with me, of 2 different liquids, let's say High C fruit punch. both red in color. Take 2 cans and pour it into a tall, skinny glass and a short, fat glass. A younger child who's 4 or 5 might think that one of them looks bigger than the other. But an older child who's 6 or 7 would realize, you know what, nothing has changed. It still is the same as it used to be. It just looks a little different because it's in a new container. Well, the same would be true for taking a ball of clay, stretching it into a snake. A younger kid would think that now is bigger than the other one when it's just changed forms, that's all. Concrete operational stage, 7 to 11. This is when you really start to understand your place in the world and how things work in the world so much differently than you could have when you were younger. Conservation is still taking place at this stage because 7 kind of borders the pre-operational and the concrete operational stage, but children are much more able to solve problems as long as they are, well, concrete in nature, not abstract. And that's why the stage of the theory is called concrete operational. Formal operational is Piaget's last stage. This is when children 11 plus are starting to think abstractly about their world. They're able to understand algebra, missing numbers, map reading and how that represents the world outside, philosophies, religions. So Piaget would argue it doesn't make sense to teach kids these things before they are at least 11 and they're able to understand abstract concepts. So Piaget's theory is cognitive, and it's only about childhood development up till about the age of 11. This is very different than Erik Erikson. There's a handout on him as well that you will see attached by PDF document on Canvas. Erikson says there are 8 stages of development. Rather than looking at cognitive factors, he looks at social factors. So that is very different. And that will be also on a Canvas question this week. So, Erikson developed his theory after being trained by Sigmund Freud's daughter. Very much a psychoanalyst like her father was Anna Freud. So Erikson learned that. So he thought he was expanding on Freud's theory or elaborating on it to discuss how the unconscious works. So here is what Erikson said. Throughout the lifespan, not childhood, that's Piaget. Throughout the lifespan, there are 8 stages, and there is a crisis at each one. Which side are you going to fall on? The adaptive one or the maladaptive one? First of all, infancy, trust versus mistrust. Can I trust people? Can I trust the world? Am I going to get what I need? That's the stage of infancy and the crisis that goes with it. Second stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is the toddler stage, 2 and 3-year-olds. Children of this age, they want to feel like they can do things. They'll tell you no, mine, I want it. They want to assert their independence, autonomy. And if they don't get to do that, they feel shame and doubt. Next stage, preschool years, initiative versus guilt. Children want to think of their own ideas of what to eat, what to wear, what to watch on TV, what games to play. They want to think of their own ideas, initiative. And if they don't get to, they feel a sense of guilt, like their ideas were bad ideas. Next stage, elementary school years, from about 5 to 12 years old, industriousness. Children this age want to feel like they are good at things. That's what industrious means. Good at sports, good at socializing, good at school, and if not, they feel inferior. They feel like everybody is better than them, and that's not a good feeling to have at all. Next stage, high school years, identity, figuring out who you are. Who are you exactly? That's your identity. And if you don't find that in your high school years, roll confusion. Some of you were just in high school months ago. You might remember all the different groups that you tend to hang out in one group but not another group of kids. Well, that's part of finding an identity. And if not, you end up in role confusion and you could be confused about who you are, well, forever. Moving right along, early adult years, intimacy versus isolation. During early adult years, all the way up till maybe 35 years old, you should be getting close to people. Whether it's getting married, getting a group of friends together that you'll stay with forever, a significant other in your life, intimacy. And if you don't find that, you feel isolated. That's why it's called isolation. Next stage, generativity. This is middle age. I hate to admit it, this is my stage of life. Generativity. As a middle-aged person, your thinking is, how do I keep moving forward in life? How do I keep achieving things? How do I not slow down or stop completely? And that's the opposite, stagnation. If you're not generating or feeling generativity, then you stagnate, you get stuck. The last stage, ego integrity versus despair. As an older person, 65 and older, your stage of life is, how do I keep feeling good about myself, knowing that most of my life is behind me? And if you don't feel good about yourself, you feel a sense of despair, depression, and sadness. So that is stuff you need to know for the Canvas assignment this week and for the test. Moving right along. What you need to know other than this are a couple of theories and then some aspects of human development. So, first of all, a psychologist by the name of David Elkind, this was in the 70s and 80s, he said Piaget really should have had a fifth stage called imaginary audience from about 11 to 13, because kids in that age, they show off, they get really concerned about what other kids think of them, they act like there's an imaginary audience. So maybe you remember that from your junior high school days, how important it was to fit in, to be liked, to be just like everybody else. That is an adolescent stage, according to David Elkind, psychologist, called imaginary audience. Now, let's go through things that happen. I think you should find this to be even more interesting. Things that happen during the lifespan. We study psychology of development from conception through death. The first month of life is called neonate. Neo meaning new, natal meaning birth, newborn. Newborn babies can do all kinds of things. They can smell, they can hear, they can recognize their mother's voice, they can taste things that they like and that they don't like, they have natural reactions. So neonate stages are interesting to study to see what babies know when they're that little and maybe even when they're newborn. Next thing, of all five of the senses, hearing is the worst. No, I'm sorry, hearing is the best. I almost said that backwards. Hearing is the best, vision is the worst. That's what you need to know for the exam. We estimate vision being about 20 over 500 or perhaps 20 over 600. And what that means is babies are legally blind. How do we know this? Whether they focus on anything that's in front of them. Something has to be very close to a baby, especially a newborn, for them to realize what it is that they are looking at. Otherwise, they just kind of look around and stare off into space. So vision is the worst, and hearing is usually the best, unless the kid is hearing impaired, of course, at birth. Next thing, children typically sit by themselves with no help, not propped up on pillows or anything, when they are 6 months old. Walking without any help, nobody helping them, 12 months of age. So think about it this way, 6 and 12. 12 is double 6. It's an easy thing to remember. Not all babies are the same. Every kid is different. Those are averages. Gibson and Walk did studies on babies that are old enough to crawl. So there is some humor in that one of the leading experts on crawling, well, his name was Walk. Gibson and Walk. They did studies on this in the 60s with a table that was half a red and white checkerboard and half plexiglass. They tried to get babies to crawl all the way across it, and the babies would stop when they got to the part that was glass, and they wouldn't go any further. So Gibson and Walk said, in their discussion section of their research projects, these babies understood depth perception. They knew when something looked dangerous, and they wouldn't go any further. So why do babies fall into swimming pools and down staircases and into fountains and things like that? It's because they lose their balance, not because they can't detect the danger. So moving right along. Harry Harlow was actually a U of A professor for 1 year, but he's more famous for his motherless monkey studies in the 60s. What he did was, it was really cute, taking baby monkeys, they were little tiny things, and putting them in a cage with 2 fake monkeys, a wire monkey and a stuffed animal monkey. The baby monkeys liked the stuffed animal better than the wire monkey, even though the wire monkey had a baby bottle for them to drink. They didn't seem to care as much as getting to hug the stuffed animal monkey. So what Harlow said was that contact comfort is just as essential, perhaps more, for well-being than food and drink. So if you're following me on the skeleton notes or on the PowerPoint, which you should always do, we're moving right along. Adolescence. Turning the page, by the way, on the skeleton notes. Adolescence. The one thing I want you to know about being an adolescent is that this is when most people go through puberty. Not everybody. For some people, it's as young as 8 years old, maybe. And for other people, it doesn't start till they're about 14. Then you would be a teenager, not an adolescent. But usually in adolescence is when it starts. Here's what I want you to know for the exam. Girls who have an early puberty, they tend to have more social problems with their own peers. So if you're 9 or 10 years old and you look like a teenager, that's going to cause more social problems for girls. But for boys, it's an advantage because you're bigger, tougher, stronger. Other kids don't mess with you. You're playing sports. They want you on their team. But for girls, towering over your peers is not a good thing. And then if older boys are hitting on you, you don't know how to act. They think you're a teenager and you're not. So there's a handout about that as well, a CNN handout. Moving right along, early adulthood. Here's what I want you to know. 90% of all Americans get married, but half of them get divorced. This is also something that we are going to be covering in the last chapter, social psychology. But another thing I want you to know, in all cultures, there's a marriage ceremony. It's not just that we do that in Western society. In all cultures, before the ceremony, you're not married. After the ceremony, you are. So as much as cultures vary drastically, that is one thing that all of them have in common. Moving right along, middle age years. What is it like to be in your 40s, 50s, or perhaps early 60s? Well, I get to experience this. This is my stage of life, so this is especially interesting to me. 2 different things that are widely in the media that have been researched. First one, empty nest syndrome. Eventually your children move out and you are considered an empty nester. Is this a problem? Actually, for most adults who are middle-aged, they are happier when their kids move out. I don't know if any of you have experienced this in your family, but usually parents are happy to see their kids on their own and they don't get depressed and despondent over their kids moving out. That is largely a myth. What is true, though, is number 2, the sandwich generation. And you'll see a handout on that as well in the PDF that I have attached. People who are middle-aged, especially right around 50, it is very common that they are taking care of their kids and their parents at the same time. This does not happen earlier in life because your kids are young, you're taking care of them, but not so much your parents. And then when you're in your 60s or 70s, usually your kids are on your own, and unfortunately your parents are usually passed away by the time you're that age. So this is more of a middle-aged thing that happens. By the way, This is happening more and more in American society. How come? People are waiting longer to have kids, and people are living longer. So therefore, it is quite possible that you are 50 years old, you still have teenagers at home because you waited longer to have kids, and you still have parents in their 70s or 80s who need you to take care of them as well. So the sandwich generation is very real. Empty nest syndrome, not so much. More of a myth. Older adulthood. We need to go over some aspects of people who are 65 and older. First thing is, in 1980, 65 and older adulthood, that only represented 10% of the American population. Whereas in 2030, that's only 10 years from now, that will be 20% of all Americans. So, older Americans are the fastest growing segment of the US population. Why is this happening? New technology, we're learning more. Medicine, we're keeping people alive longer. People now know about healthy living, not to smoke, to exercise, what to eat and what not to eat. Any way you look at it, it could be any or all of these reasons. People are definitely living longer. So that's one reason why we have more people in this age group. The other reason is the baby boomers. People born after World War II until the Vietnam War in the 60s. Guess what? These are the older Americans now, and they will continue to be more and more. Next thing is age and IQ. As you grow older, your IQ does not go down, but what does happen is processing speed is reduced. So those IQ tests that measure things like how quickly can you do blocks or puzzles, you're going to slow down probably. Not only that, short-term memory is reduced. So your intelligence is not less than it used to be, but it needs to be measured differently because those two factors will be lower. Next thing is gender and longevity. What we tend to see is women outliving men. Not always, of course, but this is a very common pattern in the United States and throughout the world. At birth, for every 100 females, there are 103 males that are born. So that friend of yours is having a baby? I would guess boy. Slightly more boys than girls. However, for people who live to be 65 years old, which is most people, but not everybody, for every 100 females, there are 70 men. Much more women than men. Now, for people who live to be 100 years old, which is pretty rare by the way, only 1 out of 5,000 people in the United States live that long to be 100. For every 100 women, 19 men. Now, I'm going to send you a link, you'll see it on Canvas, to a website that actually keeps track of people that are over 110 years old. That is pretty old. And what do we find on that website? Right now, the last time I checked last week, 28 women, 0 men. I've been using that website in class for years, and it's never been 0 until now. That's pretty scary. Prospects for us guys, isn't it? So, super